Right, hello, ladies and gentlemen. So, in today's episode, I talk to Jared, who is also really well known on social media as Jay Crushes It. And he shares his story around his adventure on the Pacific Crest Trail. And he talks through how he prepared, how he trained, the experience he had on the trail, the challenges he faced, and his plans for the future. Now, this is a really interesting episode for anyone who may be considering a big long through hike, maybe considering a big challenging adventure, and would like to get a little bit of insight into, how it goes on the trail and the different things you may face as you go along. So really fantastic episode. I really do hope you enjoy it. So with all that being said, let's get into it. Hey, my name is Rowan Smith, and I want to welcome you to the Training for Trekking podcast. Now, this is the world's very first podcast which is entirely dedicated to helping you train, prepare, and conquer your upcoming hike, trek, or mountain adventure. So once a week, I'm going to be giving you quality and practical information on the subjects of physical preparation for trekking, dealing with altitude, and nutrition on the trail, so you can know everything you need to be doing to have the best chance of a safe, enjoyable, and successful adventure. So now you know what you're in for. Let's get into today's episode. Hey, welcome, Jared. Thank you so much for coming on the show. Really looking forward to having a bit of a chat today. And yeah, hearing all about your story, your hiking, this big adventure you just done, and obviously your training and your prep. So yeah, really looking forward. So thanks for getting involved, mate.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
So I guess to kick things off, then, just to give us a bit of a background about who you are, so the kind of listeners kind of know where you're coming from here. Could you just give us a bit of a rundown around, a little bit about yourself, who you are, where you're from, and yeah, just a bit about your story.
Yeah, for sure. So my name's Jared. I live in Idaho in the U.S., and I've been kind of on a interesting journey over the last 2 years. 2 years ago, I was severely overweight. It was about 480 pounds. And I lost 230 pounds in a year and a half. And with my goal being I wanted to through hike the Pacific Crest Trail as my reward. And it's just a dream I've always had and something that wasn't really reality until I made it happen. And I went out this year and I made it 600 miles before an ankle injury took me off trail. And I tried to go back out, did another 40 or 50 miles, and it was just too painful to continue. So I got off trail and sort of took a month or two to rehab my ankle. And now I am training and still rehabbing the ankle, but I'm training. I'm going to try and do a through hike again next year. So I'll start over from the beginning and try and give it one more go.
Yeah, fantastic. Well, I'll be super interested to dive into all that, and yeah, I guess we'll talk about the prep leading into it. We'll obviously talk about the trip on the trail, and then yeah, sort of how I guess you're approaching things a little bit differently afterwards. So yeah, we'll talk us through what was the inspiration for the PCT specifically. Like you said, you've been wanting to do it for ages, but what really prompted you to choose this particular adventure?
Yeah, for sure. So I've always kind of been an outdoorsy guy. I'm a big snowboarder and skating and things like that, and kind of just sort of the more extreme sports before I let my weight really get out of hand, and it kind of stopped me from doing all those things. And hiking has always been, I've always had a big love for hiking, but I've never done any long trips longer than like a week or two, no through hikes or anything like that. And I had just started seeing videos of people hiking the PCT. And so I read a book about it and then just kept kind of looking into it. And I was like, man, I really wish I could do that someday. And then, some life events happened and I just decided, we got locked down for COVID, and I just decided I'm going to put all of my energy into training for that and losing the weight, and making it a reality. Just kind of fulfill that dream,
Fantastic. And you mentioned you'd kind of way back when you had read a book about it. Can you remember what book it was?
I don't know exactly what it was called, but it had a person that had done the hike, and they had really cool illustrations, and they tracked everything, like all the food they ate, and took pictures and the different weather, the different animals, all kinds of things like that. I wish I had it in front of me. I can't remember what it's called exactly.
Oh, that's all good. That's all good. I'm always curious about finding another adventure story that does have a bit of an inspiration around it, but that's no dramas. So yeah, well let's talk about the training and the preparation leading into this, because obviously massive adventure. Obviously, you were going through a pretty personal journey for yourself. So when you were planning this training and preparation, how did you go about it? Give you the rundown.
Yeah, definitely. I had been, like I said, I was focusing on losing weight. So I had been walking and lifting weights 4 or 5 times a week. And then I was riding an exercise bike every night. And then it turned into, in the weekends, I have a golden retriever dog. And she loves to go on hikes. So on the weekends, we'd start hiking and try and increase the distance more and more. And then when it got to winter and the snow was just too much to deal with to go hiking to prepare that way. So I switched up my gym routine and started doing a lot more lower body stuff and a lot of, the stair stepper. I was on that thing more times than I can count. So it was really just trying to get my body weight as low as possible so I could try and avoid injuries on my legs and my ankles. And then, making sure I had the endurance to get out there and, make it between the water carries.
Yeah. Was this sort of approach you took, was this stuff you just self-taught yourself and you kind of figured things out? Were you sort of working through resources, working with coaches? Where did this all come from?
Yeah, the strength training, my older brother is a bodybuilder. And I used to be an athlete and I used to play football. So I was familiar with the gym. And I just started working out with him a lot. And then, doing my research online of, what's the best exercise I can do to prepare for the hike. And a lot of the answers were always, you prepare for a long distance hike by hiking, and testing your gear and making sure you're ready to go that way. So I knew I wanted to get a lot of steps in and do a lot of climbing. And I knew that my legs were going to be the most important part. So I just kind of switched up that gym routine and, had a lot of help from my brother as well.
And then through this sort of preparation and training process, were there any sort of particular challenges that you kind of ran into or faced, before you got on the trail? And if so, how did you go about overcoming them?
Yeah, my ankle that I ended up injuring, actually, I knew beforehand that it could become an issue. And that was my biggest concern because I had broken my ankle in the past and I have a metal plate in the side of it. And when I was training, once I got up in miles and started doing, the 15, 20-mile days, I noticed my ankle started getting a little sore after that. So I'd take a rest and then it would be fine for a few weeks. But, when you're doing through hiking, you don't have that luxury of resting like that. So I knew it was going to be a concern, but I just thought it was manageable. And, looking back, I wish I would have done a lot more work around my ankles and a lot more rehabbing that ankle in particular. But now I know what to focus on for this next attempt.
And I guess aside from the ankle specifically, any other particular challenges you faced through this process that you can recall?
Yeah, definitely. One of my biggest things was, and might be a little unique to my situation, but I have a very large social media presence. So I was lucky enough to have all my gear was sent to me just through my followers. And then a company, Z-Packs, gave me my big three. But the problem was they were waiting for a new edition of a backpack to send me. So I didn't get my big three items until 2 weeks before the hike. So I didn't have time to go test all out that stuff and make sure I knew, what I'd like to use. And I made a couple changes within that first, 3 weeks on the trail. But yeah, just not being able to test all of my gear fully was a little nerve-wracking to start.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And as you sort of said, definitely a bit of a unique situation with getting the gear all sent to you. And I know a bunch of listeners are probably like, oh my gosh, that's exactly what I want to do. So they'll probably kill me if I don't ask this question. It's a bit off track, but I'll ask it anyway. Getting yourself into that type of position where, potentially do have a big following in the hiking community, potentially people are sending stuff over to you. How did you begin that whole journey? Very, very briefly.
Yeah, started with tracking my weight loss online. I had a private account that I just wanted to track my progress with. And then randomly saw this new app called TikTok, and I wanted to edit some videos because I used to be in video editing, and I didn't know how it worked. I had 0 followers, so I just made a video, downloaded it to put on my private Instagram, and looked a couple hours later, and it had 500,000 views. So I just decided to kind of run with it, and I built my following. I'm just about to hit 1 million now between Instagram and TikTok, and just built this really great community that loves to support each other.
How good. Oh, good. Well, for anyone who is curious about that, we'll be dropping all Jared's social links, all of that in the show notes and at the end. So you'll be able to check that out and have a look through that journey. Because I know if I hadn't asked that question, I would have gotten 100 emails after this podcast going, "Hey, why didn't you ask that?" So thank you there, Jared. But back on track on the I guess the prep for the trip. So we talked, about physical preparation and planning. Now, obviously, through hike on the PCT, massive adventure. And a lot of people do say, look, the mental side of things, it is sometimes even more important than the physical side of things, a bit debatable, but it's obviously a big thing. So before you got into it, did you think about the mental side of things at all? And if so, like, what did you do to help prepare for that?
Yeah, absolutely. And I, doing my research, a lot of people said the mental aspect is really hard. So a few things I did. One of the parts they said was hard is, being alone, and, kind of missing home, things like that. So I took off and did a 3 months traveling and hiking, just kind of living out of my truck and exploring and just kind of learning to be okay being alone and just kind of enjoying experiences by myself. So I, checked that box off that I knew I would be okay being alone and going on the trip alone. And then the discipline part of it of, you have to get up and you have to walk and hike every day, whether you want to that day or not. And I had been working on my discipline with losing weight for, 1.5 years prior to that. So I knew I was locked in there. And I knew going into it that the only thing taking me off trail would be injury, which unfortunately happened. But yeah, it was just, a lot of it too is you don't really know what to expect until you get out there. So the nerves leading up to starting the hike get pretty intense. But once you get out there and you get a few weeks under you, that all kind of goes away and you kind of start to feel like you're in a groove out there.
Yeah, for sure. And let's talk about this adventure then. So, first week on the trail, like you've done all this prep, you've done all this lead up, you got your pack on your back, you step out on the trail, like first 7 days or so, like how did it all play out initially?
Yeah, it was, a shock right from the beginning because you're starting off in the desert, and the first day or the second day, depending on how you do it, you have a 16-mile water carry in the heat of the desert. And the end of that 16 miles is hiking out of a canyon. And I got there and I had prepped and I knew the water source was that far away. So I had enough water for me. There was about 3 miles left to go till I got to my next water source, but it was up that canyon and I had 1 liter of water on me. So I knew I would be fine. But when I started hiking up that, I started passing some hikers that were really struggling. There was an older gentleman that was trying to find shade, like laying next to a rock, and he was completely out of water and just in rough shape. So I gave him half of my water, just, to get him by. And then not 20 minutes later, there was another guy completely out of water, heat exhaustion, and had to actually call search and rescue with his Garmin. And, that was day 2 for me. So it cemented in right away that, I was happy that I prepared for it, but it also cemented in that, it's not all fun and games out there, and you got to be prepared and you got to know what you're doing.
Yeah, absolutely. My gosh. That's like trial by fire, like for those guys at least. But yeah, my gosh. And I guess aside from obviously those surprises, which maybe you hadn't counted on, any other particular challenges, surprises you kind of faced in the first week on trail?
Yeah, I had tested my shoes and my socks situation because trying to avoid blisters, but by day 2 I had some pretty gnarly blisters. So I took a 0 day on day 3, which I had no idea I was going to do or expected, but it turned out to be a great thing because the blisters healed right up and I was able to keep going just fine. Um, Another thing is, you see a lot of videos and you see people like grouping up and they call them tramlies, a trail family. And, that just didn't really happen for me. Just everyone's kind of at a different pace. And, they say you just wait, you'll meet some people. And, it took me about 500 miles until I got into a group with some guys that we all really enjoyed our company. But so, yeah, I was pretty solo for a lot of the trip, which I wasn't expecting, but turned out to be just fine. And I enjoyed it either way.
And then talking about the rest of the trail, like, before we get into, sort of the other sort of challenges and things that popped up, what were the sort of highlights of the trail in itself of all the distance that you covered?
Yeah, it's at the end of each day, that feeling of accomplishment, knowing that you had a hard day and you did it. And, you can go to bed knowing that you've accomplished something every single day. And I just really enjoyed that aspect of it. There was some particular challenging mountain ranges. The San Jacintos were a little challenging for me because they still had snow. Same with like Mount Baden-Powell still had snow on it, which, it wasn't too bad, but it's enough to where I'd have to put crampons on, and it kind of makes you a little uncomfortable when you're at those heights. And if you slip, it can be catastrophic. But like I said, once you get through those days and you're setting your tent up at the end of the day, that feeling of pride and accomplishment, and extreme exhaustion, they all kind of add to like this euphoric high that you get day after day.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. And anything else, like on the highlight side of things, anything else you in particular remember that you're like, oh, that was awesome?
Yeah, there was when I was about mile 400 and I had heard some hikers talking about, we were staying at a camp and they were talking about the next day they were getting an Uber ride to go into Six Flags to go to an amusement park. And I hadn't been in one since I was a child because, and when I got bigger, you can't ride roller coasters. So it was, not really a hiking highlight, but we got off trail one day and a group of us went and rode roller coasters all day. And then got right back on trail the next day and went hiking, which was pretty awesome. And then I had another off trail experience where I had NBC pick me up, sent a car, pick me up off trail, and I went and did an Access Hollywood segment for the news, and then they dropped me off on trail with the makeup still on, and I just kept hiking. So there's little things that just, kind of bizarre, unique experiences.
And then let's flip that around then. So let's talk a little bit more about the challenges that you faced. And you mentioned the ankle, and we'll go into that in a little bit more. But before we get to that, what were the other sort of challenges that you did face, and what did you do to overcome them?
Yeah, my biggest enemy on the trail was wind. It's just something I didn't prepare for because I just didn't think about it. And so wind and sleeping kind of go hand in hand. The wind was like just so loud I couldn't sleep. And then I, just got earplugs and everything was fine after that. But I also messed with my sleeping arrangements a few different times because I started with a blow up pad. And I just didn't enjoy it as much because I was around other people and they're kind of loud and I like to roll around in my sleep. So I found myself like sleeping next to my pad on the regular ground. And so I switched it out for just a foam, accordion pad, and that was much better. But there's a lot of people that would, they call it cowboy camping without a tent. And it took me over a month before I felt comfortable enough to do that. Just with all the bugs and rattlesnakes and everything. Just little unique things that you go through when you're out there.
Yeah. And let's talk about the ankle then, because you said, obviously that was the big deciding factor on the trail. And I'm gonna ask about this, and we're going to talk about it in a bit of detail, not to kind of like rub salt in the wounds or anything, but because I know so many listeners on this podcast, they do struggle with aches, pains, and limitations. And a lot of people are aspiring for these types of adventures. So to be able to talk through this in a kind of bit of detail around how it sort of crept up on you, sort of what we'll experience, I think it will be really, really valuable for a lot of listeners. So forgive me if I kind of poke into this is a little bit, but yeah, let's talk about the ankle. So on the trail, you said in the prep you had realized, look, it was something that, you needed to be considering. On the trail, where did you sort of first start to notice it again?
It wasn't until about mile 500, actually. There was little aches and pains that pop up, like I said, and my knees were giving me problems on descent. So I got knee braces, and kind of learned to use my trekking poles a little differently, to take some of that pressure off. But the ankle started bothering me when I started pushing high mile days, when I started, shooting for the 20 miles every day. And the Pacific Crest Trail, it's never flat. You're always climbing or up or climbing down. And so I started to feel it, just pain. And I'm like, that's okay. I can deal with that. But the problem really came when I would wake up and it would start to like give out on me. And I got into 600 miles. So I was about to enter the high Sierras, and it was one of the hardest decisions I've made. But looking back now, I feel like it was the right one. But I think it would have been irresponsible of me to go into the high Sierras with an ankle that was giving out. Where you have to climb over some of those passes, and it's really dangerous. I think it would have been, not just putting myself at risk, but then, if I had to call search and rescue or anything, then it's, you're involving other people in it at that point. So I just decided I'm going to go get it checked out by a doctor, and see what's going on, because it's not worth, if it's just a little bit of pain, I can deal with that. But if I'm doing permanent damage on my ankle, that's something I'm not okay with. And I was worried I was getting to that point, and it was time to talk to a specialist.
Yeah. So let's talk about then, you said you started to feel it, at that sort of mileage mark, particularly when you did start to ramp up the miles. And then it kind of got to the stage where it was sort of, I guess, giving out a little bit. In that situation, or what were you doing to kind of deal with it? Like before you made the decision to stop off, like what were you sort of doing day to day to just try to survive it, I suppose?
Yeah. The biggest help for me, honestly, was other hikers. I would just talk with other hikers when we get to water sources, and, everyone kind of checks in with everyone else. And, I'd be like, yeah, my ankle's kind of bothering me, and this is what's going on. And I dealt with a little bit of shin splints earlier on. And some hikers, told me some stretches that would help. And my shin splints went away after a week. So when I started bringing up my ankle, there were some helpful hikers that were like, try this and try these different stretches and things to see if that helps. And, just kind of, if it was really bothering me, I'd take a Nero or a Zero that day and just kind of rested as much as I could. But, eventually once it started getting bad enough to where the rest day wasn't helping enough. And every morning, the first 2 or 3 hours I was hiking on it, it was really painful.
Talk me through what was going through your head with all of this, because obviously eventually before you hit those Sierras, you said you stepped off, and it, for those reasons that you stated, definitely sounds like it was the right choice. But obviously that would have been a big mental battle for you, during that time. Like what was going through the head? What were the type of things that sort of you were telling yourself, or was just running through?
I'm not going to lie, it was extremely hard, and it was emotionally, definitely tasking, just because it's something I dreamed about for so long. And then, the aspect I was documenting it all on my socials. So I felt like this responsibility of, not quitting, or letting anyone else down, which I know is silly. It's about me. It's hike your own hike. But that's still hard. And, part of me was like, I told myself going into it that no matter what, I was going to make it at least 500 miles. And then after 500 miles, if I wasn't having fun, if I didn't enjoy it anymore, then I would be okay going home. So once I hit that 500 miles, I kind of checked in with myself mentally, and I was having the time of my life. I'd finally met a really cool group of people, and, I just enjoying every day out there in nature. So when I had to get off trail is when I absolutely did not want to. But like I said, I wasn't real willing to risk permanent damage. And at the end of the day, I can deal with my emotions. I can deal with that, but permanent damage is something that I wasn't prepared to deal with.
Absolutely. And so let's talk about when you actually stepped off the trail then. So obviously, you stepped off at this stage, you got the ankle got in the way and you might, you know what, I'm going to do the right thing here. But obviously, you still accomplished a massive adventure and a massive accomplishment. So after you actually got off the trail, did you do anything to, I guess, reflect on what you've achieved or celebrate, what you had done?
I'm still kind of struggling with that a little bit because, I catch myself saying, I only made it 600 miles. And then everyone's like, you hike 600 miles. That's incredible. But for what I was trying to accomplish, it's not enough for me. The trail is 2,650 miles and I just bit off a chunk of it and I just wasn't quite ready to leave yet. So once I got home, it was great to see the family and my dog and my girlfriend and everything like that. My girlfriend being so patient with me and going on this adventure and knowing that she probably wouldn't see me for, a few months at least. We decided to take a trip and we went to Cabo in Mexico and kind of spent a week there just relaxing and enjoying each other's company. And then, I came home and, it's 5-6 months you're on the trail, supposedly is the goal. So I had to quit my career and everything before that. So getting home now was kind of like, okay, what's next? Are we going to, do we go back to work? Do we do this? Just trying to figure out what I wanted to do with my life. And it pretty quickly decided, I'm not going to let the trail beat me. I will be that trail. So now I'm just focusing 100% on preparing for next year's attempt.
Okay. So let's talk about this then. So leading into next year's attempt, what are you thinking you might, I guess, do differently, or what approach are you going to take this time, getting ready for it all?
Yeah, I was still, when I went into it last year, I was still about 40 or 50 pounds overweight. So this year I'm going to go into it in the best shape of my life, hopefully. So just, and every pound counts when you're putting it all on your back, as you know. And so just trying to be in the best shape possible. And I'm focusing a lot of my workouts now on building the strength in my ankles and doing a lot more. I've never really been a stretcher or like yoga or anything like that, but I'm starting to do a lot more stretching and a lot more just being mindful of what I know are my potential weaknesses and really focusing on those.
And then when are you thinking the return will happen? Have you got a timeline in mind?
Yeah, I really enjoyed when I went last year, so I'm going to do the same. It's towards the end of March, I'll take off.
Fantastic. Oh, how good. Well, I think this has been really, really, really interesting. I think we covered some really solid stuff today. And as I sort of said, a lot of people listening to this podcast, they do have aspirations for similar things like this. And they also do go through similar struggles to kind of what you mentioned here. So I think a lot of the stuff you said is going to be really, really valuable and definitely resonate with a lot of people. I guess before we kind of get to the end of this, was there anything else that you kind of wanted to add today that maybe we hadn't covered today or you thought might be valuable for future thru hikers or anything like that?
I would just add that, if this is something that you've kind of thought you wanted to do, or if this is a dream you've had, that to just start taking the first steps to make it happen. A lot of times that's the hardest thing, is taking that first step. So just get after it. And I've yet to meet a hiker that regretted the decision to go on a thru hike. And it can absolutely be life-changing. So I highly, highly recommend it.
Fantastic. And if people listening to this wanted to, I guess, find you online, learn more about your story leading into this, or follow, your future prep and your future adventures, what's the best place they can find you?
Yeah, definitely. I have a Instagram, a TikTok, and a YouTube. The YouTube's just hiking specific, and the Instagram and TikToks are a mix of, my weight loss and adventuring and traveling and hiking. So a little bit of everything on all three of those.
Fantastic. Well, what I'll do is for all the listeners, I will get each of those links and I'll just pop them in the show notes below. So if you want to kind of check any of those out and follow Jared's adventures or his journeys or anything like that, yeah, the links will be for you in the show notes below. But aside from that, I think this has been absolutely awesome having you on this this chat today, Jared. I think we covered some really cool stuff, and I think this is going to be really interesting for a lot of the listeners. So thank you so much for coming on. I really appreciate you taking the time and thank you so much again for getting involved.
Yeah, thank you. This was a lot of fun. I appreciate it.
You've been listening to the Training for Trekking podcast. So if you've enjoyed this episode, please remember to subscribe, rate, and review us in iTunes. So thanks for getting involved, and we'll see you on the next one.